This is CJ Baker. This is the ongoing history of protest music. This is the first video I made in a while, and I'm not sure yet if this will be an ongoing thing. But if you want me to keep making videos, then of course, like, subscribe, comment, tell others. So basically, let me know I'm not just shouting into the void. So the motivation of this video is that I recently joined a Discord slash Patreon community called Taste Like Music. So feel free to check them out on YouTube as well, Taste Like Music. Part of this community, we regularly do deep dives into different decades and different artists. And recently, the community did a deep dive for 1984. So in connection with this, the main host of Taste Like Music, Jason and Joe, posted their top 25 videos of the top 25 songs and the top 25 albums. And many in the community, including myself, have shared our personal top 25 list as well. I figured since this is a channel and the website, which is also connected to this, since it's dedicated to protest music, I thought what we'll do today is we'll discuss the top 10 protest albums of 1984. And I also plan on following that up with top 10 protest songs of 1984. So maybe before we begin, what is a protest album? Well, in some cases, it could be a very explicitly political album, but just about every song is like explicitly political. Like if you think of something like Rage Against the Machine. In other cases, maybe not every song is explicitly political, but maybe the album as a whole does express a social consciousness. So that's very much evident as you listen to the album. In other cases, sometimes just the act of making music could be a political statement. But sometimes due to the artist's personal circumstances or the political environment that they're recording in, that could make just the making of music an act of protest. So before we get into the top 10 list, which I'll be presenting alphabetical order instead of numerical order, I'll consider three honorable mentions. So the first honorable mention is Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So it's the debut album, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And I was debating whether or not to mention this because the album itself is too long and uneven. And it does start off strong, but then all of a sudden it just falls off a cliff. So if they cut the album in half and kept all the good songs, this potentially could have been an excellent album. But I did feel that it'd be good to mention this at least as an honorable mention because it is a significant album. Like Frankie Goes to Hollywood, they're not the first openly gay musicians, but in 1994, there was still a stigma attached to coming out and embracing gayness. Like, for example, the biggest hit, Massive Relax, that was actually banned by the BBC. So even though that song is not the prototypical protest tune, the embrace of sexuality and the promotion of sexual freedom, that could be considered a political statement. And then on top of that, the album also contains a couple of anti-war tunes. So it includes a couple of Edwin Starr's War. It also features two tribes, which articulates the Cold War anxiety that many were feeling at the time. Our second honorable mention is by Reagan Youth, Youth Anthems for the New Order. This is their debut, which is technically an EP, but it is music to pump your fist to, and it's filled with righteous indignation. So Reagan Youth was a very important band in the development of anarcho-punk. So this EP was repackaged with 3 additional songs in 1988 as Volume 1. So the entirety of Volume 1, along with their 1990 album, Volume 2, was featured on the 1994 compilation, A Collection of Pop Classics. So at 22 songs in 1 hour, it makes for an easy artist deep dive. The next honorable mention, and the final one, is I Steel Pulse, It's Earth Crisis. So this is the 5th album by the UK roots reggae band. So back in the 70s, they were heavily involved in the rock against racism movement. So they do have stronger albums, such as their excellent 1978 debut, Handsworth Revolution. But the album is a decent, socially conscious reggae album. And it's also notable for its provocative album cover, which helped inspire the metalcore band of the same name. So now we'll get to the proper top 10 list. So we're going to begin with an album by Billy Bragg, Growing Up with Billy Bragg. So when you envision the stereotypical protest singer, you might think of someone like Billy Bragg, a folk singer with guitar. So this could be viewed as Bragg's first full-length. So since his debut, Life's a Riot with Spy vs. Spy is technically EP length. But this is, as we mentioned, his first full-length. So this album is a fine showcase of what Bragg as well. It is a solid mix of both the political and the personal. In Bragg, he displays his skill as a social commentator. So notable protest tunes on this album includes It Says Here, which is a scathing indictment of tabloid journalism. It also includes the anthemic anti-war tune, Iron of No Return. So the next album by Bruce Cockburn, Stealing Fire. So the Canadian singer-songwriter is no stranger to politically conscious music. And this album is a prime example of this. The album was inspired by a trip to Central America on behalf of the charity Oxfam. So based on that cultural exposure, he was motivated to incorporate world music influences, and the lyrics articulated the plight that many were experiencing in countries such as Nicaragua and Guatemala. It's also interesting to note that U2 was inspired by Cockburn, specifically this album. So, for example, Bono referenced one of the lyrics from Lovers in a Dangerous Time. That's the lyric, got to kick at the darkness where it bleeds daylight, in the song Guard Part 2 from their 1988 album, Rattle and Hum. And in the liner notes of that album, they also credited Cockburn. And they also attempted to cover If I Had a Rocket Launcher during rehearsals, even though they never recorded it. So the next album is by Willie Dunn, The Vanity of Human Wishes. So this is probably the most obscure album on this list. So Dunn is an indigenous Canadian singer-songwriter and activist. But back in 1968, he directed and released a video for his tune, The Ballad of Crowfoot. So this has been credited as the first known Canadian music video. So up until recently, his albums have been out of print, but thankfully, they have recently been reissued. So this is Dunn's fourth album, and like his previous albums, it features poignant insights on Indigenous issues. It highlights Canada's dismal track record on Indigenous rights. So musically, it kind of sounds like an Indigenous activist version of Gordon Lightfoot. So that's a similar Lightfoot type vibe. So also, if you're interested in discovering more about Dunn, there's an excellent 2021 compilation, Creation Never Sleeps, Creation Never Dies, the Really Dunn Anthology. So that's highly recommended. So our next album is by Iron Maiden, Powerslave. So heavy metal is often overlooked for its contributions to the canon of protest tunes. And Iron Maiden is no stranger to addressing societal issues in their music. For example, is the 1982 classic One to the Hills off the equally classic album, The Number of the Beast. So this tune addresses the plight of the Indigenous. Also, Bruce Dickinson's underappreciated skill as a social commentator is on fine display on the band's fifth album, Powerslave. Both the album title and the title track deals with how humans are enslaved to a corrupt system where we pursue secular pursuits that in the end we can't take with us when we die. The album also features the catchy nuclear war protest tune, 2 Minutes to Midnight. Just as a bit of a teaser, that song will also be featured on my protest song list. So I'll discuss the tune in more detail in the following video. So the next album, it's by Linton Kwesi Johnson, and it's Making History. So this album by the Jamaican-born, British-based dub poet is a really strong showcase for his insightful political commentary. On the opening track, The Eagle and the Bear, and elsewhere on the album, he addresses the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union and the fear of nuclear proliferation. He also eloquently addresses working class struggles, police brutality, racism, along with other societal ills. So he teams up with his frequent collaborator, Dennis Bovell, who, with his skilled musical arrangements and production, he provides the ideal canvas for the lyrical portrait painted by Johnson. So the next album's by Midnight Oil, Red Sails, and The Sunset. So the fifth album by the Australian rock band was the first album to hit #1 in Australia. It wasn't until their 1987 album, Diesel and Dust, and the massive hit, Beds Are Burning, that they achieved widespread worldwide success. But this album is definitely worth checking out. Even though some of the themes are Australia-centric, the album's exploitation of themes such as concerns over nuclear warfare and environmental destruction are universal and sadly still relevant. So the next album is by the Minutemen, double nickels on a dime. So if I was doing a ranked protest album list, this album would be #1 with a bullet. It was #3 on my general 1984 album list, and it's a 5-star album. In many ways, the band's DIY aesthetic and their jamming econo philosophy is an act of protest against the status quo and the mainstream music industry. The eclectic nature of this album shows that the band wasn't going to allow themselves to be boxed in by the confines of punk. So, in a sense, that could also be considered an act of protest, and specifically an act of protest against genre or genre norms. So, on top of all that, many of the tunes on the album also feature explicitly political lyrics. Like a lot of the music from this time period was influenced by Cold War anxiety. It also tapped into past histories, such as the fallout from Vietnam. I could have made a list of the top 10 protest songs off double nickels on a dime. This album is an absolute masterpiece. The next album is by Metallica, Ride Lightning. So what I previously said about Iron Maiden, I can cut and paste and say the same about Metallica. The band is often overlooked for their contributions to the canon of protest songs. And also, like Bruce Dickinson, James Hetfield is undervalued for his abilities as a social commentator. So this is evident on the band's sophomore album. So the album's title, Ride the Lightning, and the title track is a reference to a death row inmate who's about to be put to death by the electric chair. It is a pointed critique of a flawed criminal justice system. And elsewhere on the album, the band takes direct aim at corrupt power structures and expresses concerns over nuclear annihilation. So the next album is by New Model Army, Vengeance. So this is the debut album by the UK post-punk band, and it's a confrontational album where the band wears their politics and convictions on their sleeve. The opening track, Christian Militia, deals with religious hypocrisy and how so-called Christianity's blood guilt through their endorsement of countless wars. So it deals with how they were involved in the promotion and endorsement of different wars. So elsewhere is the song Spirit of the Falklands, which is a commentary on the 1982 Falkland War. And the confrontational title track is an anthemic tune about taking a stand against injustices. So a final album is by U2, The Unforgettable Fire. So this is the band's fourth album, and it's the follow-up to War, which is probably the band's most explicitly political album. This album is definitely socially conscious. For example, the album title in the title track is a reference to an art exhibit about the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The album also features 2 tunes inspired by the life and death of Martin Luther King. Anthemic, Pride in the Name of Love, on the album's closing track, MLK. This is also the first album produced by Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois So that signifies a new direction sonically. So this this concludes the list of top 10 protest songs of 1984. What did you think about the list? Were there any songs that I excluded that should be included? Well, not songs, albums. Was there any albums that you felt should be included that I excluded? Let me know in the comments and feel free to protest the list. So if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And for more info, feel free to check out the website, Ongoing History of Protest Songs.com. So I don't post on the site as much as I used to. As a minimal, once a month, I post an overview of socially conscious music that's been released throughout the month. And you'll also find a number of different articles and lists concerning the historical developments of protest music. So thanks for watching, and please stay safe.